Alrighty, guys, welcome back. April 2nd, Sunday. Zen Cop, Mac Rollins. Same person, in case you're new. We are here today. Make sure I'm doing this right. Sorry. Close tab. No. Still getting the hang of this stuff, man. I don't know why this is so difficult sometimes. Close browser to ensure blah, blah, blah. Whatever. All right. Welcome back, guys. I appreciate you listening. If you are listening, it means a lot. I'm still trying to build a platform here and reach out and connect to as many people as possible. And for those of you who have liked and subscribed, thank you. I didn't really understand what all that meant. I mean, I knew what it meant, but it's just one of those things that you don't really do. But it does make a difference in terms of creating a platform and stuff like that. So I appreciate you guys for listening. And if you are, I'm trying to keep content, excuse me. I'm trying to keep content up to date, but also not super redundant, because I feel like in this career field / information sharing type thing, it can be a little redundant. So, we're going to probably talk about some stuff that'll be redundant today, but it is what it is. So obviously, there's a lot that's being talked about right now with the incident that occurred in Nashville. And I know that everyone right now is talking about it, and that's fine. Before you click skip ahead, or you choose to close out the window entirely, hear me out. We can all agree that it was a good job, and we can all agree that everything went pretty much how it should, right? Okay, cool. I don't want to beat a dead horse with that. I really don't want to dive into tactics. I watched the video probably several times, a few different camera angles. I thought it was fantastic. Response time, movement, all of it was stellar. And there's some people who are making sure that that gets discussed, but there's also a lot of people who aren't saying anything at all, but who were very vocal almost a year ago. And we're going to back up to almost a year ago. So May 24th, 2022. This is where I want us to change our focus, because I've been talking about this for years now, where I really feel like we are doing things backwards and borderline in the realm of insanity. So if we go back to May 24th, 2022, that was a Tuesday, and that Tuesday began pretty much just like any other at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. Around 11:28 a.m., Mr. Salvador Ramos, 18 years old, he was a former student. He basically entered the campus and started shooting. He was armed with 2 AR-15 style rifles, and while he was on the campus and inside the school, he would occupy about an hour and 20 minutes. And in that hour and 20, it was just complete and total chaos. Cops showed up and ultimately held their positions in a fairly lengthy hallway for an obscene amount of time. And after just over an hour and 14 minutes-ish, Mr. Ramos was finally shot and killed by police. And in that time period, Mr. Ramos ultimately killed 21 people, and he also injured 18. Now, in the months that followed this incident, the lack of action by the cops that were there would be criticized by the masses, to include members of law enforcement nationwide. I mean, national media outlets completely centralized on this incident for weeks, along with a variety of talk shows, podcast or social media, whatever. Tactics and training, action, all of it was once again a speaking point for the general public, and society would once again become overnight experts on mass shootings, firearms, firearm regulation, legality, all of it. And what I found really interesting about that incident and what followed is that I've said this for years, but there's always a pattern, right? And the pattern at this point, it's almost like it's textbook. Every time this happens, as a nation, we are so quick to focus on the incident, right? And not what caused the incident. And I would argue that it's really important to understand that attacks of any kind, they're rarely unprovoked, right? So do they happen? Yeah, absolutely they happen. But those attacks are usually based on opportunity rather than the violent act itself. So if you were to think of, just say, for example, we have someone, walking down the street, they get assaulted for their phone and wallet, right? In doing so, the suspect punches the victim repeatedly, demands the wallet and the phone. The victim complies, and bad guy flees the scene, leaves. There is a action of violence, and then there is a reward, so to speak, for the suspect for doing that. That is, an opportunity-based attack. But if we were to look at something a little different, right? In a different scenario, let's say an individual at some point in their life experiences, something that pivots their mental health and ultimately sends them into a very different direction. And over time, this person will experience additional scenarios coupled with complete lack of redirection from friends, family, specifically in leadership roles, right? And this separates the difference between crimes of opportunity and crimes of what I would call personal retribution. And while one definitely happens more frequently than the other, when the latter happens, they are without question tenfold in terms of victimization and, generally speaking, death. And the question that I have posed for many, many years is, why do we spend so much time focusing on the action and the means rather than the person and the why? I promise you, the action and the means, they're going to be a variable factor no matter what. Okay, no matter what. But those are the final steps before that big show really takes place. And it's the person and the why that we have to address long before the thought process of violence against others becomes a reality. And if we started to dig through a lot of these, mass shooter, active shooter, whatever you want to call them, dig through their past, right? Post-incident, it's almost like canned language. You hear buzzwords like depressed, outcast, loner, angry. The FBI was made aware of it. They had him on their radar. He had a history of XYZ. I've never heard of an active shooter, mass shooter that was described as happy, outgoing, social, with a stable parental structure and family. At some point in their life, perhaps, but somewhere along the way, absolutely not. Something changed. Something big changed. And this is where I have my own theory in terms of where we are going in terms of violence among modern society and how different it is from what we saw in years or even decades past, right? For me, I was born in 1985. So my generation, we were part of that group that was in or around high school when Columbine happened. And Columbine, looking back on it, and I've done a lot of research on that incident, and the more that I dug into the details, the more that that was not just a quick attack. That was a couple of years worth of planning, educating, and implementing their plan of action. This is before Google. This is before all of it. They had to go out and find these resources themselves in a time period where the internet barely existed. And if you consider the timeline, coupled with the fact that they worked as a pair, they were a team, and none of this made a difference, that just shows that their whole basis for this event was based on pure hatred, organic in every sense of the word. These guys really wanted to kill, and they wanted to do it because of personal vendetta, gain, etc., not like it is today. Now, when we look at active shooters and we look at the behavior of the modern day active shooter, right, it's very different from the shooters that we've seen in the past. A lot of these kids, not juvenile, but kids, they are quite literally not even, most of them I would put them between 18 and 25. A lot of them are still trying to figure out who they are. The brain is still developing at that age. You know, you're still learning and growing as a person. And the majority of these kids had some type of tailspin into adolescence. And it wasn't something minor. It's usually something big, but we tend to ignore the lead up, right? Does the snake just bite you? No, the snake usually is afraid and will go away. But if you keep fucking with it, then yeah, it might react. It's the same concept with kids, and especially in modern society. And I want to be clear, I'm not agreeing with any of this, but it's where we are. So, you know, we can argue and say, oh, that's a horror. Yeah, that's great. I agree. But we have to deal with the problem, regardless of how ridiculous it may seem. We have to address the issue. And for me, the major issue on the table right now is there's a complete lack and utter disregard for the mental health epidemic in this nation. It is not a problem or a crisis. It is an epidemic tenfold. We are seeing new numbers with children this time, actual juvenile children, that are attempting suicide, threatening suicide, and even successfully killing themselves. That didn't used to happen. And I can attest to personal experience and on-the-job experience where I can say with 100% certainty that suicide under the age of 18 is on the rise by a very large margin. Now, that's an unpopular topic. Why? Well, I think that it's easy to put blame on the gun. It's easy to put blame on gun legislation, blah, blah, blah. Those are political speaking points. So, of course, that's going to be the knee-jerk reaction from the political party that opposes that stuff. Now, consider California, where I live and work. In California, it is probably one of, if not the hardest state to buy a gun, own a gun, and have fun with a gun, because there are so many restrictions and regulations, background check, all of it. It's kind of that running joke of we can't make things any harder, yet we're one of the states that harbors the most gun violence in the nation. It just doesn't make sense. So that's a criminality thing for California as well. Same for Detroit and some of the other cities that are falling victim to this huge surge of, I refuse to call it gun violence, but I would say gang violence or criminal violence. That's what's on the table for most inner cities right now. But I do want to throw this piece of information out there. And most people who don't know this are generally shocked when they find out. So what if I told you that if we put effort, money, funding, whatever you want, and my goal is to reduce gun violence by half. I'm going to cut it in half. Actually, even better, I'm going to cut it more than in half, right? Everyone says, that's great. Yeah, let's do it. How do we do that? Well, 60% of gun-related deaths in America, 60% of gun-related deaths in America are suicides. Suicide by gun. That death statistic is quantifiable data that is used in the National Gun Violence Report that comes out annually. If you didn't know that, now you do. So in order to cut gun violence in half by a little more, we simply end suicides. Now, I know it's not possible, but that's a very large chunk of gun-related deaths, which in my opinion, I don't think that suicide should be combined with criminal element. That doesn't really make sense to me. Is it gun violence? Technically, yeah, but it's not an act of violence committed by two parties. It is a single party committing an act of gun violence against themselves. You can't arrest someone for committing suicide, so why should we stat that as a gun violence statistic? If anything, it's sort of pumping up those stats. And the average person doesn't know that, which I do think that people don't necessarily use that as a speaking point, because if you're for that side of the argument, because it sounds bad. So my question to everyone is, if this mental health issue stuff is on the rise, we can all agree on that. And if you don't agree with that, I don't know what to tell you. The mental health, the epidemic, the crisis, whatever you want to call it, is on the rise. So how do we fix this issue? Because I would absolutely lump every single active shooter we've had in the history of this nation in the same category as criminal as well as mental health. It's the same thing. And to separate the two, I think would be a disservice, because if you were to ask me, well, how do we stop this from happening again? Which is a very popular question. And I agree that there needs to be an answer. How do we stop this from happening again? Well, if we were to stop this from happening again, it would have nothing to do with the gun. So let's talk guns just for a quick minute or two. In order to buy a gun, in most states in the nation, and I'm not even going to use California as the example. I'll use some of the other more, lax states that are oddly enough very safe, considering the gun legalities over there. But in most states, if you are 18 years old, you can purchase a long gun rifle. I won't speak to handguns because I don't know. A lot of states do require you to be 21 to own a handgun. Some states have pistol grip requirements. My point is that you can go in and buy a gun when you're 18, and rightfully so. If I can join the military, if I can vote, if I can do all these things, if I can live as an independent adult free from supervision, then I have the right to defend myself and my family and my friends, whatever the case may be. So I'm 100% on board with that being ironclad. If you're going to change that, then you need to change everything else, because I don't think that's realistic. If you can get your nose pierced and get your tattoo, pick your poison, right? That just seems a bit ridiculous to me. But the argument over alcohol, we could go down a rabbit hole. I don't want to do that. So let's get off the off ramp and back on the highway here. I think that the gun argument is a moot point. That's my 2-minute little rant on that. There's not a lot we could do. And even if this person was, say, a prohibited person, it wouldn't be hard to get a gun. That's just the reality of the world we live in. And unfortunately, that's not going to change, because I know some people would say, well, we have to get more guns off the street. Well, then talk to your local cops, talk to the feds, talk to the DOJ. Like, I don't know what to tell you. We're doing everything we can. And a lot of people like to place blame on the FBI. Well, this guy was on your radar, but you didn't do anything. I'm not a big fan of the feds, but if most people understood their caseload and the radar that they're expected to monitor, it's impossible. Couple that with all the other Homeland Security, all that bullshit. It's just so difficult. So again, going back to the bigger picture, smaller focus, right? Mental health. How do we solve that issue, and how do we address it to where it's a realistic approach, right? And long before these people bought a gun, I assure you that this was not just a knee-jerk impulsive decision. There was a thought process behind this, and they didn't just wake up one morning and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to go shoot up a school. No, they went through, I would even say, years and years of some type of whether it's trauma, whether it's identity issues, it's chemical imbalances in the brain. All of these eventually led them to making the decision of, yeah, I'm going to go and inflict a large amount of violence on the innocent. And it doesn't get much more target rich than a elementary school, where you have children who, for the most part, are not going to run. They're not going to really have a reaction. It's a very, very easy way to kill people. And that's why I also think that the majority of these people are cowards, and they also know deep down, though, that this is going to grab the attention of the media. If you notice, And we've had them happen where a disgruntled employee shows up and blows away half the office. Those don't stick as much as the school shooting, specifically elementary school. Why? Because killing children is worse than killing adults. That's just human nature. We are going to have a lot more sympathy, and rightfully so. To see a child get killed is far more tragic than someone in their 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever. It just is. That's how we view that, and that's how the media gravitates towards those stories. They will do their best to focus on the absolute worst. And again, that's a rabbit hole right there, media. But let's keep talking about the why. And if we were able to get ahead of that, right? And there's no data collection. There's no quantifiable data where I can say, look, we found Joey, and because of the program we put him into, and because of the, counseling and some of the, intensive psychotherapy he went through, now he won't shoot anybody. He's not going to become an active shooter. We don't have that. This isn't Minority Report. There isn't pre-crime. I can only stat the incidents that happened. It's the same thing with suicides. Can I sit down and say, oh, well, this group of guys and gals over here, they didn't kill themselves because they got the help they need and we figured it out. I mean, maybe once in a while you'll get someone who said, yeah, I was going to, but I didn't. But that can't be statistically collected. We can stat the dead people. This guy blew his head off. Cool. That's suicide. I can't stat this guy didn't kill himself. It just doesn't work that way. So it's the same thing with these active shooter types, where we're not going to be able to collect that data and say, cool, here's our findings based on the, implementations we put out on the street and within the patrol team and within working with Health and Human Services and the mental, blah, 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 blah. It just doesn't happen. So even further than the mental health realm is taking a real deep dive into the concept of serial killing. Now, serial killers was coined by the FBI sometimes in the 60s, early 70s. Don't quote me, I'm probably messing that up. But either way, it was a term that was coined when a group of individuals working within the FBI decided to take a deeper dive into what makes people actually want to kill. And if you look at serial killers, the last serial killer we had, if you can name one, I'd be impressed, within the last 20 years, right? If we dug deep, yeah, we can find them. But because of the tech boom, this is just my personal theory, that the tech boom essentially stopped serial killers from being prevalent within society. Why? Well, because it's almost impossible to drive, walk, spit on the sidewalk without a camera capturing that, or cell data, data that's collected when you're running your apps. I mean, the smartphone alone is tracking us everywhere. And even if you leave your smartphone somewhere else, there's still ways around it, right? It's not hard to do that. So you do see killings, look at Moscow, Idaho. That was a pretty rare event in terms of mass killing and no suspects. If you took the time to read the affidavit, you learned that there was a lot more going on behind the scenes than the public was aware of. But my point is the heavy hitters, right, from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the serial killers that were able to kill because the information was delayed so much. That's why they were successful. It's because it took time to process evidence. It took time to do follow-up. And even though they were moving as fast as they could, the cops were always a few weeks behind that person, even if they were able to identify them. That's usually how it worked. Not to mention law enforcement agencies back then didn't share information. It was just a different time to be alive. Nowadays, there's networking galore. I mean, you can find someone within a few seconds if you know how to do it right. And I think that the personality types, right, the very core parts of the brain that create the serial killer mindset are absolutely real. They're just not active. So in a strange way, if you're going to be a quote unquote serial killer, which is pretty hard not to, because serial killer by definition is a succession of crimes with, time in between, blah, 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 blah. I just don't see that being something that can happen today. So with these active shooters, with these people who are pretty much committed to inflicting acts of violence. Is that now the new version? And I don't know what to call them because serial killer would be the wrong word. Let's just call them killers. But is that what we're looking at in terms of what's going to be the future for these people who still have those desires? So do they plan, and then they act? That's my thought process. Are we going to see, the same types of patterns that drove, society wild? If you look at some of the major, more prolific serial killers throughout history, not just in America, but worldwide, it was, the act of murder followed by this, adrenaline rush to the killer that people were trying to figure out who they were. And then when will they strike again? If they strike again, copycat killers, the list goes on. But that ability is hindered drastically these days. So I do think that if we were able to stop or otherwise just sort of hit the pause button on a lot of these kids and redirect. I mean, if you look at the consistency with a lot of these active shooters, a lot of them lacked a strong parental environment. And some will go, no, I saw on the news that his parents were totally cool. Well, of course they're cool. When they go on the news and they talk to people and they do interviews, do you think they're going to admit that they were shit parents? No, they don't want to get sued. They already are going to get sued. So they're not going to go on TV and say that, hi, I'm the dad of so-and-so and I was a real asshole. I'm a drunk and I beat him for most of his, first 5 years. And then mom, yeah, she's also a mess. And no, they're not going to say that. They're going to say they were great parents. They were a happy family and they had no idea this was coming, which is all poor shit. We know that. Because there are so many families who are not willing to either address the issue or put in the work. And that's my own little soapbox on parenting. When you had a kid, you signed a social contract that you are now responsible for that person. And you are also responsible to ensure that they are a constructive member of society. And that's based on how they are raised, who they're exposed to, what they're exposed to, and how much you control that. So if there's, 10 or 12-year-olds that are given free rein and there's no structure and they're exposed to all the horrible things that the internet can bring. I'm not bashing technology, right? Because we can get into the argument of, well, God forbid the internet, but no, it's there, right? It's a new element that most of us were not used to as kids. So I don't think we understand the totality of what that tech brings with it. There's a pretty hefty price tag, but if you do it right and you pay attention, that could work. So that's kind of my rant on how we address active shooters, how we address violence. It's a multifaceted approach and it's a multifaceted issue. We're not going to solve it overnight, but here's my argument is that we've been doing this the same way over and over again, expecting a different result every time. Albert Einstein would argue that is insanity. I'm tired of watching this country go insane. I'm sick of it because we don't do anything. We have a moment of silence. The president gets up and says, oh my God, this is horrible. Oh my God. And then if it's a Democratic president versus a Republican, it's just going to be political, right? Joe Biden, got to ban guns. Okay, cool. What's that going to do? Nothing. Because we can't ban guns. We're not going to. And if you are in favor that, gun manufacturers should be held responsible. If your, son or daughter was killed in a DUI crash, is it reasonable to sue Ford? I mean, yeah, if there was a faulty airbag deployment or something happened, but not if there was a drunk driver. That's not Ford's fault. So I do want to end with just briefly touching on Nashville. And I will say this, that if you said one word about the lack of response to the Uvalde shooting, and you are saying nothing about what happened in Nashville, you're part of the problem. Society bitched at cops for months about how to do our jobs. People who have never pointed a gun at anyone, let alone killed anyone, are now telling us how to do our jobs. And I will 100% agree that Uvalde was a shit show. And I know for a fact that there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of cops all over this nation who would have done things differently if they were given the chance. And if society knew how much we do, I shouldn't say all of us, but most agencies, mine included, how much we train for this scenario, and the response that we've given most of these schools that ended up being just a big nothing. It was a false alarm, whatever you want to call it. But the response that was there was amazing. And as we go through these again and again, and cops see the stuff like Uvalde, it's almost a personal vendetta. No, we're going to get there and we're going to do work. But if you look at Nashville, their number got called. They showed up. I have no words for the families who lost loved ones. It's beyond horrible, beyond comprehension, but it's happening too much. It doesn't have to happen that much. But I'm also really thankful that there weren't more. And that's because of swift violence and action from Nashville PD. They showed up, they got a plan. And I think within about 3 minutes, they eliminated the threat, and lives were saved that day. But for the peanut gallery, who are on the fence, right, who are not sure, and as the days turn into weeks, we're going to start to see it, and we're seeing it already. Where, well, why didn't you de-escalate? Why didn't you do this? And it's so sad that we're able to assume or cast judgment. I don't care who this person was. I don't care that they were, in transition. I don't even have the whole story on who this person was, but I understand that they were of a sex that they were not born with. I don't even want to get into it. I don't care. I don't care what you are. Creed, color, stripes, religion, doesn't matter. If you are going to inflict violence on the innocent, it is our job to stop that violence. And I don't care, but going back to my argument earlier about identifying issues that become bigger, if this individual was experiencing some type of mental health crisis, whether it was sustained or not, there was more that could have been done on the back end to help this person not get to this point. That's the whole point of what I was talking about earlier. However, once they cross that line, it is our job, to end that threat. And the shooter in this scenario, they elected to have court held immediately, and they made a choice. The cops responded based on that individual's desired course of action, not the cops. But this video and the after action stuff that needs to circulate, we need to make sure that this circulates just as much as Uvalde, because the problem I have is that if it's not circulating, why not? Right? I mean, some would make the argument, well, the violence, that doesn't need to be circulated, and I say absolutely not. Why not? What better way to show potential shooters, right, what went wrong in Uvalde, right? And then we'll show them how it's done right. And you couple the tactic of fear along with addressing the major mental health crisis in the U.S., and you might actually see some success, right? I don't think that we're going to, see any success unless we start combining those two efforts together, right? But if you're willing to analyze the mistakes, you must allow the same circulation for the accolades. That's fair. I think that's fair. And it should be, because in this scenario, we did exactly what the people were screaming about post Uvalde. And now I kind of feel like only certain political affiliations are saying, yes, thank you. And there's not a lot of praise on the other side. If anything, I kind of feel like we are defending the shooter in this scenario, which I do find strange, because I know for a fact, we all do, that if this shooter didn't meet a certain criteria in terms of sexuality or sex overall for male versus female, imagine if this is a white kid with an AR-15 that was an alt-right kid, that would be different than what it is now, which is not okay in my opinion. I don't care what you are. Violence is violence, and addressing that violence is just that. So job well done to Nashville. You guys saved a lot of lives. My hat's off to you. And I'm sorry that you were put in a position that ultimately involved taking the life of someone else, but it was the only choice you had. And my question to the general public who are on the fence is, if that wasn't good enough, then what is? can't be, moving in a couple different directions. That's not how that works. So, this is a topic that I obviously am passionate about, and I believe that there is a happy medium between all of it. And if we don't start identifying the core issues or the crux of the matter, we're just going to keep doing this, and these will keep happening. And as much as I can appreciate swift action and movement on behalf of these cops, that whole incident could have been avoided entirely by other things that should have happened a long time ago, right? We're only analyzing the last 12 hours or so of this person's life, when we really should be looking at the last 12 years. And a really interesting thing that I remember, there's a movie called Bowling for Columbine, and I absolutely despise Michael Moore, but I make it a point to allow myself to look at all different platforms of media and film, not just the ones that I know I'm going to like. I like to introduce concepts that I would usually find controversial, not to engage intentionally in, an argument or yelling at the TV or whatever, but just to hear the other side. And Michael Moore sat down with Marilyn Manson, and at the time, the Columbine, Trenchcoat Mafia, all that stuff, they were attributing a lot of this stuff to music, which is strange to me because I'm a huge music guy, to include a lot of really weird shit. But I remember Marilyn Manson, he was talking to Michael Moore, and Michael Moore asked him, "What would you have said to these kids?" And Manson said, "I wouldn't have said anything. I would have listened." And I think that's a huge, speaking point or lack thereof that we really need to start considering for the future, and especially the future of our kids, because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when this happens to your school, your city, your neighborhood. And I just hope that there comes a time where we start to see a decline in this issue. Sadly, though, however, with the way things are going, I don't see that happening. I'm not trying to be pessimistic, just realistic. So it is the way it is. Hey, guys, thanks for listening. I'm going to wrap this one up. It's probably the longest podcast, video, blog, whatever you want to call it, I've done. But hopefully it wasn't, I don't know. I'm very critical. Thanks for listening. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you guys next weekend. If there are things that you would like to hear me talk about, content-related things, you can always find me on Instagram at the Zen Cop. I am on Twitter, but I don't tweet. And here on YouTube, if there's something you want to hear, let me know. I got a lot of hot air that I'm trying to get out. So, yeah. Anyway, I don't know how to wrap these things up. Bye.